Preston Sterling thought his platinum card gave him the right to rule the skies. When he saw a quiet man in a worn-out hoodie sitting in seat 1A, he didn't see a person. He saw a target. For 2 hours, Preston used every trick in the corporate playbook to humiliate, bully, and remove the unwanted passenger from first class. He thought he was asserting dominance. He thought he was winning. But Preston made one fatal calculation error. He didn't check who actually owned the plane. This is the story of how arrogance crashed into dignity, and the brutal lesson one silent CEO taught a bully about true power. The coffee in the VIP lounge at O'Hare International Airport was lukewarm, but Samuel Vance didn't complain. At 55, Samuel had learned that the loudest complaints usually came from those with the emptiest lives. He sat in a high-backed leather chair in the corner of the lounge, far away from the buffet and the bar, nursing a cup of tea and reading a leather-bound book. He wore a gray hoodie that had seen better days, comfortable chinos and clean, but unbranded sneakers. To the casual observer, Samuel looked like a retired grandfather perhaps visiting family, or maybe a man who had scraped together enough miles for a one-time upgrade. To the discerning eye, however, there were details that told a different story. The watch on his wrist was a vintage Patek Philippe, understated and worth more than most of the cars parked in the garage outside. The book he was reading wasn't a paperback thriller, but a first edition of Stoic philosophy. And his posture, spine straight, eyes observant, was that of a man who was used to commanding rooms, not serving in them. But Preston Sterling was not a man with a discerning eye. Preston stormed into the lounge like a hurricane making landfall. He was 45, wearing a tailored Italian suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a testament to gym sessions that were more about vanity than fitness. He had a Bluetooth earpiece blinking in his ear and a crocodile skin briefcase clutched in his hand. He was sweating. "Move the meeting to 3, Preston barked into the air, ignoring the receptionist who tried to scan his boarding pass. "I don't care if the acquisition team is tired. If we don't close this merger by end of business, the stock tanks, and I'm not losing my bonus because some lawyer in Atlanta can't read a spreadsheet." Samuel watched Preston over the rim of his teacup. He knew the type. He had fired hundreds of men like Preston over the last 3 decades. They were the middle management kings. Men who mistook pressure for power and volume for authority. Preston made a beeline for the table next to Samuel, dropping his heavy bag with a thud that shook the floor. He went to the coffee station, poured a cup and turned around too fast. Brown liquid sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the pristine carpet and splattering Preston's polished loafers. "Damn it!" Preston shouted, causing the lounge to fall silent. He looked around frantically for a napkin, but the dispenser was empty. His eyes landed on Samuel. "Hey buddy," Preston snapped, snapping his fingers. "Yeah, you. Grab me a towel. This table is a mess." Samuel lowered his book slowly. He looked at the spill, then at Preston's red face, and finally locked eyes with the man. The lounge staff were busy on the other side of the room. In Preston's mind, the hierarchy was clear. He was the executive in the suit, and the black man in the hoodie sitting quietly in the corner was obviously staff on break, or at best, someone who shouldn't be there. Samuel didn't speak. He simply reached into his own pocket, pulled out a clean monogrammed handkerchief and held it out. Preston snatched it without looking at it. He wiped his shoe vigorously, muttering about incompetence, then tossed the soiled silk cloth onto the table next to Samuel's book. "They let the service standards drop to hell in here," Preston grumbled into his headset. "I'm telling you, Jerry, once the merger happens we need to clean house. Cut the dead weight." Samuel picked up his ruined handkerchief. He folded it neatly, hiding the stain, and placed it in the trash bin next to him. He didn't correct Preston. He didn't introduce himself. He just opened a small notebook from his pocket and made a note. "Flight 492. Chicago to Atlanta. Seat 1B. Attitude volatile." This wasn't just a flight for Samuel. It was an inspection. He had acquired Legacy Air 48 hours ago in a silent takeover that hadn't hit the news wires yet. He wanted to see what he had bought before the corporate PR machine rolled out the red carpet. He wanted to see the truth. And Preston Sterling was providing plenty of data. 30 minutes later, the boarding process began. It was the usual chaotic dance at the gate. The gate agents looked harried, typing furiously as standby passengers hovered like vultures. Preston Sterling was of course a gate louse. He stood right at the edge of the carpet, blocking the path for families with infants, tapping his foot impatiently. When the agent announced Group 1, Preston muscled past an elderly woman with a cane. "Excuse me, coming through, Platinum member," Preston announced, not looking her in the eye. Samuel waited. He stood back, leaning against a pillar, watching the flow of humanity. He saw the gate agent, a young woman named Brenda according to her name tag, sigh as she scanned Preston's phone. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling," Brenda said, her voice robotic. "Yeah, let's hope the plane is actually on time for once," Preston retorted, snatching his phone back. When the line cleared, Samuel approached. He handed Brenda his paper boarding pass. He preferred paper. Technology had a habit of failing when you needed it most. Brenda scanned it. The machine gave a distinct double-tone beep. It wasn't the standard approval sound. It was a priority override code. A sound that signaled a VVIP, an owner, or a federal marshal. But Brenda was distracted. The phone at the desk was ringing, and a passenger from Group 4 was trying to sneak into the jet bridge. She didn't look at the screen which flashed Chairman Vance. She just heard a beep and waved him through. "Have a good flight," she said, already looking past him. "Thank you, Brenda," Samuel said gently. "Hang in there." She blinked, surprised that a passenger had used her name and actually sounded like they meant it. But Samuel was already moving down the jet bridge. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, an older model that Samuel's team planned to retire next year. The first-class cabin had 12 seats. Samuel was in 1A, the window seat in the front row. It was the most coveted spot on the plane, offering the most legroom and the first drink service. Samuel placed his small carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into the seat. He took out his notebook again. The leather on the seat was cracked. There was a coffee stain on the carpet. He noted it all. Then the storm arrived. Preston Sterling boarded, breathing heavily. He jammed his crocodile briefcase into the bin above row 1, crushing Samuel's jacket in the process. He stopped when he saw Samuel sitting in 1A. Preston looked at his own boarding pass. 1B. Then he looked at Samuel. Then back at his pass. The confusion on his face wasn't just about seating arrangements. It was a cognitive dissonance. In Preston's worldview, the man in the hoodie belonged in the back of the bus, near the toilets, not in the prime seat next to him. "Excuse me," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're in the wrong seat." Samuel looked up, his expression unreadable. "I don't believe I am." 1A. Preston let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. He turned around and flagged down the lead flight attendant, Sarah. Sarah was in her late 20s, trying to finish the pre-flight checklist while greeting passengers. She had a kind face but tired eyes. "Miss," Preston called out, snapping his fingers again. "We have a situation." Sarah hurried over. "Yes, sir? How can I help?" "This gentleman is confused," Preston said, gesturing at Samuel like he was a piece of misplaced luggage. "He's sitting in 1A. That's obviously a mistake. I need you to check his ticket." Sarah looked at Samuel. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Samuel handed it to her. She checked it, then checked her manifest. "Mr. Vance is in the correct seat, sir," Sarah said, handing the pass back with a smile. "You are in 1B right next to him." Preston's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He leaned in closer to Sarah, lowering his voice but not low enough. "Look, honey, check the upgrades list. Or the non-rev list. Employees flying on standby aren't supposed to take front row seats when paying customers are available. I paid full fare for this ticket. I have a lot of work to do. I need space." He wasn't saying the word, but the implication hung heavy in the recycled air. He was assuming Samuel was an employee or a charity case or someone who had gamed the system. He was assuming Samuel didn't pay. Sarah stiffened. Her training kicked in. "Sir, Mr. Vance is a revenue passenger. The flight is full. Please take your seat so we can close the doors." Preston glared at her, then at Samuel. He huffed, grabbed his briefcase from the bin to retrieve his laptop, and slammed the bin shut. He squeezed into seat 1B, making sure to shove his elbow firmly onto the shared armrest. "Unbelievable," Preston muttered, loud enough for Samuel to hear. "Legacy Air really has no standards anymore. Anyone can just walk in." Samuel put on his noise-canceling headphones. He didn't turn on any music. He just activated the silence function. It muffled the drone of the engines, but he could still hear Preston's voice perfectly. He wanted to hear everything. As the plane taxied, the dynamic in the cabin shifted. The other passengers in first class were watching. In seat 3A, Mrs. Gable, a woman in her 60s with pearls and a tight grip on her purse, watched with suspicion. When Samuel had boarded, she had pulled her bag closer to her feet. She shared Preston's bias, though she was too polite to say it out loud. She watched the two men in row 1, waiting for the inevitable conflict. In seat 3B next to her was Mike, a younger guy in a tech hoodie of his own. He had headphones around his neck and was tapping on an iPad. He had seen the interaction. He had seen Preston snap his fingers. He had seen Samuel's calm reaction. Mike frowned, sensing the bully in the room, but stayed quiet. The plane took off smoothly, climbing through the gray Chicago clouds into the brilliant sunlight above. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Preston immediately reclined his seat all the way back, invading the space of the person behind him, and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. "Yeah, I'm in the air," Preston said loudly. "The Wi-Fi is garbage, just like everything else on this flight. I'm sitting next to... Well, let's just say the neighborhood has gone downhill. I'm going to need you to sanitize the contract before I get there." Sarah came by with the drink cart. "Mr. Sterling? A drink? Scotch. Double. No ice. And bring me some of those warm nuts. And clean up this tray table, it's sticky." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. "I'll be right back with the nuts, sir. And you, Mr. Vance?" "Water, please," Samuel said softly. "Sparkling if you have it." Sarah smiled, a genuine one this time. "Of course." As Sarah walked away, Preston leaned over the armrest, invading Samuel's personal space. "So what are you?" Preston asked. His tone wasn't curious, it was interrogative. Samuel turned slowly. "Excuse me? Rapper? Ball player?" Preston smirked. "You guys usually travel with an entourage. Or did you blow your signing bonus already?" Samuel took a sip of his water. "I'm in logistics," he said simply. "Logistics?" Preston scoffed. "You mean you drive a truck? Look, buddy, good for you. You saved up your overtime and bought a ticket. But here's a tip from someone who actually belongs here. Don't act like you own the place. Keep your elbows on your side, don't talk to me, and don't recline your seat. I have real work to do." Samuel looked at Preston. He looked at the sweat beading on Preston's forehead, the shaking of his hands as he typed on his laptop. He saw the fear radiating off the man. "You seem stressed, Mr. Sterling," Samuel said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the engine noise. "Is the merger not going well?" Preston froze. He slammed his laptop shut. "How do you know about that? Were you listening to my call? That is confidential corporate information. That is insider trading material. You were shouting it at the gate and in the lounge," Samuel said calmly. "And now you are shouting it in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. If you want confidentiality, I suggest you learn to whisper." Preston's face turned purple. "You listen to me." Suddenly the plane lurched. The engines whined down. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We have a warning light on the hydraulic pressure system. It's likely just a sensor error, but safety is our priority. We're going to have to divert to Indianapolis for a quick maintenance check. We'll be on the ground in 20 minutes. Groans erupted throughout the cabin. But Preston Sterling looked like he was about to have a stroke. "No, no," Preston yelled, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I have a meeting at 2 o'clock. I cannot stop in Indianapolis." "Sir, please sit down," Sarah said, rushing over. "The seatbelt sign is on." Preston ignored her. He stood up, towering over Samuel. "This is your fault." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "My fault that the hydraulics need checking? Bad luck follows bad company," Preston spat. He sat back down hard, buckling his belt with aggressive jerks. He began typing furiously on his phone, likely sending abusive emails to his assistant. The landing in Indianapolis was rough. The plane bounced twice before settling. They taxied to a remote corner of the airfield, far from the terminal. The heat of the tarmac began to seep into the cabin as the engines were cut. Captain Miller came on the PA again. "Folks, maintenance is on their way out. We have to keep the auxiliary power off for the inspection, which means the AC will be down for about 30 minutes. I apologize for the inconvenience. The temperature in the cabin began to rise. So did the tension. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. It was getting stiflingly hot. Preston was pacing in the aisle now, phone in hand. I don't care what the pilot says. Get me the gate manager. Preston yelled at Sarah. I am a Platinum Elite member. I demand a car to take me to Atlanta right now. Sir, we are on a remote stand, Sarah explained, her voice trembling slightly. We cannot let anyone off until the stairs arrive. And that won't happen until maintenance clears the safety check. This is kidnapping. Preston screamed. He turned and pointed a shaking finger at Samuel, who was sitting quietly, fanning himself with the safety card. And why is he staring at me? Tell him to stop staring. He's being aggressive. Samuel hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. Sir, he isn't doing anything, Sarah said, stepping between them. He's making me feel unsafe. Preston lied. He's looking at me with malice. I want him moved. When we take off, I want him in the back. I won't sit next to a thug. The word hung in the air. Thug. Mrs. Gable in 3A gasped softly. Mike in 3B pulled his headphones down around his neck. Samuel unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up. He was taller than Preston, broader in the shoulders. But he didn't step forward. He stood his ground. Mr. Sterling, Samuel said, his voice ice cold. You are violating federal aviation regulations regarding crew interference. You are also making a public spectacle of yourself. Sit down. Don't you tell me what to do. Preston shouted. You think because you put on a hoodie you can intimidate me? I know who calls the shots here. I have the corporate office on speed dial. Just then the cabin door opened. A man in a high-visibility vest and a tie walked in. It wasn't the mechanic. It was Kevin, the ground operations manager for Indianapolis. He looked sweaty and nervous. Mr. Sterling? Kevin asked, scanning the cabin. Preston raised his hand. Finally. Someone with authority. Get me off this plane or get this person away from me. Kevin looked at Preston's expensive suit. Then at his iPad, which flashed Platinum IP. Then he looked at Samuel. He saw the hoodie. He saw the calm, defiant posture. Kevin made a calculation. It was the wrong one. He turned to Samuel. Sir, Kevin said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. We have a situation here. To keep the peace and to ensure we can depart as soon as possible, I'm going to have to ask you to move to row 20. We have an exit row seat open. It has plenty of legroom. Sarah's eyes went wide. Kevin, you can't be serious. Mr. Vance has a valid first-class ticket. Mr. Sterling is the one causing the disturbance. Kevin shot Sarah a glare. Sarah, I'm handling this. Mr. Sterling is a corporate partner. We need to de-escalate. He turned back to Samuel, putting on a fake customer service smile. Sir, here is a voucher for $200. If you just grab your bag and head back to row 20, we can all get going. It's for the best. Samuel looked at the voucher. Then he looked at Kevin. Let me understand this correctly, Samuel said. You are asking me, the passenger who has remained seated and compliant, to downgrade my seat to accommodate a man who has verbally abused your crew and used racial slurs? I didn't use a slur. Preston interjected. I said you were aggressive. Which you are. Look at you standing over me. I'm asking you to help us depart, sir, Kevin said, his voice hardening. It's a captain's discretion to remove passengers who are causing conflict. I am not causing conflict, Samuel said. I am existing. And I will not move. I purchased this seat. Section 4 of your contract of carriage states that involuntary downgrades can only occur for safety or weight balance reasons. Neither applies here. Kevin blinked. He hadn't expected the guy in the hoodie to quote the contract of carriage. Look, buddy, Kevin snapped, losing his patience. Don't quote the rulebook to me. I run this station. If you don't move voluntarily, I'll have to call airport security and have you removed for failing to comply with crew instructions. Sarah stepped forward. Kevin, no. He hasn't done anything. Quiet, Sarah. Kevin barked. Preston smirked. He crossed his arms, leaning back against the bulkhead. That's right. Call the cops. Get him out of here. He threatened me earlier. He said he knew where I lived. A lie. A blatant, dangerous lie. Samuel looked at Preston. The smirk on the executive's face was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the look of a man who knew the system was built for him, and against men like Samuel. Samuel looked at Kevin, who was already reaching for his radio. Dispatch, this is Kevin on Flight 492. Send 2 LEOs, law enforcement officers, to the aircraft. I have a non-compliant passenger refusing to downgrade. Samuel didn't yell. He didn't raise his hands. He slowly reached into his pocket. Preston jumped. He's got a weapon. Mrs. Gable shrieked. Samuel pulled out his notebook and a pen. He wrote down Kevin's name. Then he wrote down the time. You're making a mistake, Kevin, Samuel said softly. Is that a threat? Kevin asked, his voice shaking. No, Samuel replied, looking Kevin dead in the eye. It's a documentation of a liability. The sound of heavy boots clanking up the metal stairs outside broke the silence. The police were here. Preston laughed. Game over, pal. Back to the bus stop. Samuel closed his notebook. He sat back down in seat 1A and folded his hands in his lap. He waited. He knew something they didn't. He knew that the moment the police touched him, the lawsuit wouldn't just be against the airline. It would be the end of the airline as they knew it. But more importantly, he knew that Captain Miller was still in the cockpit, and Captain Miller was the only one on this plane who had actually read the memo sent out at 8 a.m. this morning regarding the new ownership. The heavy door swung open again. 2 police officers stepped in, hands resting on their belts. The cabin was silent, the air thick with heat and injustice. Who's the problem? The first officer asked, looking between the 2 men. Preston pointed a manicured finger directly at Samuel's face. Him. Get him out. Samuel looked up at the officer. His expression was calm, almost bored. Good afternoon, officer, Samuel said. Before you proceed, I'd like to request that you ask the captain to step out of the flight deck. I believe there has been a significant breakdown in the chain of command. The officer paused, confused by the authority in Samuel's voice. Kevin stepped in. Just grab him. He's delaying the flight. But from the 3rd row a voice spoke up. He didn't do anything, Mike, the tech guy said, standing up. He held up his phone. I've been recording for the last 10 minutes. The guy in the suit is lying. Sit down, sir. Kevin yelled at Mike. No, Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling but firm. She clutched her purse, looking at Preston with disdain. The young man is right. That man in the suit is a brute. The gentleman in 1A has been nothing but a saint. Preston looked around, his eyes wild. You're all crazy. He's brainwashed you. The officers looked at each other. This wasn't a standard removal. Captain. Samuel called out, his voice projecting towards the cockpit door. The door clicked open. Captain Miller stepped out, looking annoyed at the commotion. He took in the scene. The sweating ground manager, the smirk on Preston's face, the 2 cops looming over seat 1A, and the black man sitting there with a posture that looked eerily familiar to a military general's. What is going on back here? Captain Miller demanded. Kevin pointed at Samuel. Captain, this passenger is refusing to downgrade. Security is here to remove him. Captain Miller looked at Samuel. Really looked at him. He saw the face. He saw the calm. And then his eyes drifted to the notebook in Samuel's hand. A specific brand of notebook that Miller had seen in a company-wide email just hours ago, attached to a profile of the new majority shareholder. A cold shiver went down the captain's spine. Sir? Captain Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. Can I see your ID? Samuel smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. I thought you'd never ask, Captain. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin black metal card. He held it up. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't a credit card. It was a corporate security pass with a gold chip. Captain Miller stepped forward, squinting in the dim light. He read the name embossed on the card. Then he read the title below it. The color drained from Captain Miller's face so fast he looked like he might faint. He snapped his heels together and straightened his back, a reflex from his Air Force days. Mr. Vance, the captain stammered. Preston laughed. Vance? What kind of name is that? Sounds like a fake ID. But Captain Miller ignored Preston. He looked at Kevin, then at the police officers and finally back at Samuel. Mr. Vance, I apologize. I wasn't informed you were inspecting us today. Inspecting? Preston asked, his smile faltering. What are you talking about? He's a nobody. Samuel stood up. He smoothed the front of his hoodie. He looked at Preston Sterling, and for the first time, he let the mask of the polite passenger slip. The eyes that stared back were the eyes of a man who moved billions of dollars with a signature. I am not a nobody, Mr. Sterling, Samuel said, his voice filling the silence of the cabin. I am the man who signed the check to buy this airline yesterday morning. Preston's mouth fell open. The silence that followed was louder than the engines. And Samuel continued, turning to the terrified ground manager, Kevin. I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about your definition of conflict resolution. The silence that followed Samuel Vance's declaration was absolute. A vacuum in the center of the stifling cabin. For 3 seconds nobody moved. The dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight from window 1A seemed to freeze. Then Preston Sterling laughed. It was a harsh barking sound devoid of humor, born entirely of incredulity and the desperate need to reassert control. He slapped his knee, shaking his head as he looked at the police officers, then at Kevin, the ground operations manager. You have got to be kidding me, Preston sneered, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip. That is rich. That is truly rich. Did you hear that, officer? The man in the hoodie bought the airline. Yesterday. He pointed a trembling finger at Samuel. That is the most pathetic lie I have ever heard. What's next? Are you going to tell us you're the king of Wakanda? Preston looked around the cabin, seeking validation from the other passengers, desperate to turn Samuel's moment of power into a joke. He's a con artist. Preston shouted, his voice rising in pitch. It's a fake ID. He printed it at Kinko's. Arrest him for fraud. Impersonating a corporate officer is a felony, isn't it? Kevin, the manager, blinked rapidly. The shock of Samuel's statement was wearing off, replaced by the cold, hard panic of a bureaucrat who realized he had lost control of the situation. He looked at the black metal card in Captain Miller's hand. It looked real. But the idea that the owner of the airline, a billionaire industrialist, was sitting in a delayed 737 in a stained gray hoodie was simply too absurd to process. It clashed with every bias Kevin held dear. Rich men wore suits. Rich men yelled. Rich men looked like Preston Sterling. Kevin made a choice. He chose the reality that felt safer. Captain, give me that card, Kevin demanded, reaching out. It's obviously a forgery. The manifest lists him as Samuel Vance, yes, but there's no VIP code in my system. If he was the owner, we would have had a red carpet out. This guy is mentally unstable. He's having a delusion of grandeur. Kevin turned to the police officers. Officers, I want him removed immediately. Now we have fraud and impersonation to add to the list of disturbances. Get him off my plane. The younger officer, Officer Gomez, hesitated. He was looking at Samuel. He had seen liars before. He had seen drunks, addicts, and con men. They always fidgeted. They always looked for an exit. Samuel Vance was sitting with the stillness of a statue, his hands resting gently on his knees, his gaze fixed on Captain Miller. He doesn't look like he's lying, Kevin, Officer Gomez muttered. Do your job, Preston screamed, slamming his hand on the overhead bin. I am a platinum member. I contribute $50,000 a year to this airline. This man is a nobody. Why are we debating this? Drag him out. The older officer, Officer Miller, no relation to the captain, sighed. He was tired. He just wanted to clear the call. He reached for his handcuffs. All right, sir, the officer said to Samuel, his voice weary. We can sort out who owns what downtown. Stand up and turn around. Sarah, the flight attendant, stepped forward, her hands shaking. No, you can't. Captain, please. Captain Miller held up a hand. He hadn't given the card to Kevin. He was staring at the gold chip embedded in the black metal. He turned the card over. There was a holographic watermark. It was the Legacy logo, but intricate, shifting in the light. Hold on, Captain Miller said, his voice gruff. Captain, we are losing our slot. Kevin insisted. I said hold on. Miller barked, the command voice of a former Air Force pilot cutting through the panic. Miller looked at Samuel. The captain's eyes were wide, searching. He remembered the memo. He remembered the blurry photo attached to the email sent at 4 a.m. by the transition team. New leadership. Integrity. Excellence. Sir, Miller said to Samuel, ignoring Preston and Kevin. This is real. If you are who you say you are. There is a protocol. A verification code. Preston scoffed loudly. Oh, come on. He's going to make up some numbers. Samuel didn't look at Preston. He looked only at the captain. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. A microscopic expression of approval. Protocol Oscar Vance Delta Niner, Samuel said. His voice was calm, clear, and carried a weight that made the hair on the back of Officer Gomez's neck stand up. The cabin fell silent again. Oscar Vance Delta Niner, Captain Miller repeated, his face pale. He pulled out his company phone. He didn't call the local dispatch. He dialed a number that was saved in the emergency contacts. A number that very few pilots ever had reason to use. The Global Operations Center in Atlanta, Red Desk. He put the phone to his ear. The passengers watched breathless. Preston rolled his eyes. He pulled out his own phone and started recording a video, zooming in on Samuel's face. Say hello to the internet, buddy, Preston sneered. You're going to be famous. The crazy guy who thought he owned an airline. I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to make sure you never get a job driving a taxi, let alone whatever logistics lie you told me. Samuel turned his head slowly to look at the camera lens. He didn't blink. He looked straight into the digital eye of the phone, and by extension at Preston. Make sure you get the lighting right, Mr. Sterling, Samuel said softly. Evidence is important. In seat 3B, Mike the tech entrepreneur was furiously typing on his iPad. He had connected to the sporadic airport Wi-Fi. He was on Google News. He typed in Vance Logistics Legacy Air Acquisition. His eyes went wide. Holy! Mike whispered. He tapped Mrs. Gable on the shoulder and showed her the screen. The headline, timestamp 3 hours ago, read, Vance Logistics completes hostile takeover of Legacy Air. Shadow billionaire Samuel Vance named chairman. There was a photo. It was a candid shot of Samuel leaving a courthouse in Delaware. He was wearing a suit in the photo, but the face, the sharp jawline, the intelligent, weary eyes, the scar above the left eyebrow, was identical to the man sitting in 1A. Mrs. Gable gasped. She looked at Preston, who was still filming and mocking Samuel. She felt a wave of second-hand embarrassment so strong it made her nauseous. Young man, Mrs. Gable whispered to Mike. You need to speak up. Mike shook his head. No. Watch. Let him dig. At the front of the cabin, Captain Miller was speaking in hushed tones into the phone. Yes. Flight 492. Diverted Indy. Code given is Oscar Vance Delta Niner. Yes. I'm holding the card. There was a pause. A long agonizing pause where the only sound was the whir of the avionics cooling fans. Then Captain Miller's posture changed. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a transformation. His shoulders squared. His chin tucked in. He went from being a tired airline pilot to a soldier standing before a general. Understood, Miller said into the phone. Yes, sir. Immediately. He hung up. He lowered the phone slowly. He looked at Kevin, the sweat-drenched manager who was still tapping his foot impatiently. Kevin, Captain Miller said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Yeah. Can we get him off now? Kevin asked. Captain Miller stepped past Kevin. He ignored the police. He walked right up to seat 1A. To the shock of everyone in the cabin, Captain Miller removed his hat. He tucked it under his arm. He stood at attention. Mr. Vance, Captain Miller said, his voice ringing with absolute respect. Operations confirms your identity. Code verified. The board is aware of your presence. They are asking what your orders are. The air left the room. Preston Sterling dropped his phone. It clattered onto the tray table, the screen cracking. Kevin made a sound like a dying radiator, a high-pitched wheeze of escaping air. He staggered back, bumping into the bulkhead. Verified? Kevin squeaked. That's impossible. System. The system is only as good as the people running it, Kevin, Samuel said. Samuel stood up. He didn't rush. He unfolded his limbs with the grace of a panther. He looked taller now. The hoodie didn't look like cheap streetwear anymore. It looked like the eccentric camouflage of a man who had transcended the need to impress anyone. He took the black card back from Captain Miller. Thank you, Captain, Samuel said. You followed protocol. You checked. You didn't assume. That is leadership. Samuel turned to the two police officers. The handcuffs were still in the older officer's hand. Officers, Samuel said. I believe you were called here to remove a disruptive passenger who was interfering with the flight crew and creating a hostile environment. Yes, sir, Officer Miller said, holstering his handcuffs instantly. He knew a power shift when he saw one. He stepped away from Samuel. Samuel turned his gaze to Preston Sterling. Preston was frozen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. His brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile the narrative he had built. The one where he was the hero and Samuel was the villain, with the undeniable reality crashing down on him. No, Preston whispered. No, this is a prank. You're an actor. This is one of those TV shows. Where are the cameras? He looked around wildly. There are no cameras, Mr. Sterling, Samuel said, stepping into the aisle. Just you, me, and the consequences of your actions. Samuel looked at Sarah. Sarah, Samuel said gently. Who is the disruptive passenger on this aircraft? Sarah looked at Preston. She looked at the man who had snapped his fingers at her, called her honey, threatened her job, and treated her like furniture. Then she looked at Samuel, the man who had defended her when he had every right to stay silent. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. The passenger in seat 1B, Mr. Preston Sterling, she said. He has been verbally abusive, he has refused crew instructions, and he has made threats against another passenger. Preston scrambled out of his seat. Now wait a minute. Sarah, I didn't mean it. I was stressed. You know how it is. I'm a platinum member. Status is a privilege, not a shield, Mr. Sterling, Samuel said. And yours has just been revoked. Samuel turned to Kevin. Kevin, Samuel said. You are the ground operations manager, correct? Kevin was trembling. Yes. Yes, sir. Mr. Vance. Sir. I didn't know. If I had known. If you had known I was powerful, you would have treated me with respect, Samuel finished for him. But because you thought I was powerless, you treated me with contempt. You tried to coerce a paying customer to leave his seat to appease a bully. You prioritized the noise over the right thing. Samuel took a step closer to Kevin. That is not how Legacy Air operates anymore. Not as of yesterday. Samuel turned to the police officers. Officers, please remove Mr. Sterling from my aircraft. He is trespassing. Preston screamed. No, you can't do this. I have a meeting. I have to be in Atlanta. Do you know how much money is on the line? Samuel watched as the officers grabbed Preston by the arms. Preston struggled, kicking at the seat. Don't touch me. I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole airline. Do you know who I am? I am Preston Sterling. We know, Mike from seat 3B called out. He held up his iPad. We just Googled you. Stock price for Sterling Group isn't looking too hot today, buddy. Down 4%. Preston's face twisted in rage. He lunged toward Samuel, but the officers wrenched him back, slapping the handcuffs on his wrists. The same handcuffs that were meant for Samuel moments ago. The click of the metal was the most satisfying sound Sarah had ever heard. As they dragged Preston down the aisle, past the economy passengers who were craning their necks to see the commotion, Preston twisted his head back to scream at Samuel. You're ruining me. This is personal. You're just angry because I called you out. You're petty. You're a petty small man. Samuel didn't yell back. He didn't smile. He just watched. When Preston was hauled onto the jet bridge, his screams fading into the distance, a heavy silence returned to the cabin. Kevin was standing by the door, looking like he wished he could dissolve into the floor. Mr. Vance, Kevin stammered. I can explain. I was just following the de-escalation manual. Stop, Samuel said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Samuel walked over to Kevin. He pulled out his notebook, the cheap, battered notebook where he had written Kevin's name. Give me your badge, Kevin. Kevin's hand shook as he unclipped his ID. But, convention. I have kids. I'm not firing you, Kevin, Samuel said, taking the badge. Not yet. Because firing you implies that you are the only problem. You are a symptom. The system taught you that the man in the suit is right and the man in the hoodie is wrong. The system taught you that the loud voice wins. Samuel put the badge in his pocket. You are suspended effective immediately, pending a full review of your conduct and a mandatory retraining program on bias and conflict resolution. You will not step foot on the tarmac until I am convinced you can see a human being, not just a customer profile. Now get off my plane. Kevin nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, sir. Thank you. He fled the aircraft as fast as his legs could carry him. Samuel turned back to the cabin. The passengers were staring at him. Mrs. Gable looked like she wanted to applaud but was too awestruck. Mike gave him a subtle nod of respect. Samuel looked at Sarah. She was wiping her eyes. Are you okay, Sarah? Samuel asked. She nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes, sir. I thank you. I thought I was going to lose my job. You were the only one doing your job, Samuel said. He turned to Captain Miller. Captain, how long until we can get back in the air? Miller checked his watch. Maintenance just gave us the green light on the hydraulics. It was a sensor fault as suspected. We can push back in 10 minutes. Good, Samuel said. He walked back to seat 1A. He picked up his book on Stoic philosophy, which had fallen to the floor during the scuffle. He dusted it off. He sat down. He didn't ask for an upgrade. He didn't ask for a drink. He just buckled his seatbelt. But he didn't open the book. Instead, he pulled out his phone. He had one more call to make. Preston Sterling had mentioned a merger. He had mentioned a meeting in Atlanta at 2 p.m. He had mentioned that the fate of his company depended on it. Samuel unlocked his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a number labeled Acquisitions, Atlanta Team Lead. He pressed dial. He put the phone to his ear. The cabin was quiet enough that Mrs. Gable, leaning forward in seat 3A, could hear the other end pick up. Yes, Mr. Vance? The voice on the phone was crisp, professional. David, Samuel said, his eyes fixed on the empty seat next to him where Preston Sterling had sat. The 2 p.m. meeting with the Sterling Group regarding the logistics merger. Yes, sir. We are prepping the conference room now. Mr. Sterling's assistant said he was delayed but on his way. Cancel it, Samuel said. There was a pause on the line. Cancel the meeting, sir? Or postpone it? Cancel it permanently, Samuel said. Terminate all discussions with the Sterling Group. Sir? The voice on the phone sounded confused. The financials looked promising. May I ask the reason? Liability, Samuel said. He looked out the window. He could see a police cruiser on the tarmac below. Preston Sterling was being shoved into the back seat, still kicking, still screaming. A man fighting a war he had lost the moment he opened his mouth. The CEO, Mr. Sterling, is a liability, Samuel continued. He lacks the temperament required for our partners. He is volatile, discriminatory, and exercises poor judgment under pressure. If he treats his peers this way in public, imagine how he treats his employees in private. I will not have Vance Logistics associated with that brand of leadership. Understood, sir, the voice said. I'll draft the rejection letter. And David? Yes, sir. Make sure the reason is clearly stated in the letter. Incompatible corporate values. I want him to know exactly why he lost. Yes, sir. Samuel hung up. He felt a heavy weight lift off his chest. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was simply the satisfaction of balance being restored. Karma wasn't a mystical force. Today it was a decision. He felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned. It was Mrs. Gable from seat 3A. She was holding a bag of roasted almonds that she had brought from home. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice wavering slightly. I just wanted to say, that was the most remarkable thing I have ever seen. Samuel smiled, a genuine tired smile. Thank you, ma'am. She offered him the bag of almonds. They didn't give you your snack service. And you must be hungry. Samuel took the almonds. Thank you. I am. He opened the bag and popped an almond into his mouth. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, the door is closed. We are number 1 for departure. Next stop, Atlanta. Thank you for flying Legacy Air. Under new management. As the plane pushed back, Samuel closed his eyes. He wasn't thinking about the billions he had just spent, or the merger he had just killed. He was thinking about the empty seat next to him, and how peaceful the silence finally was. But the story wasn't quite over. Because while Preston Sterling was gone, the culture that created him was still very much alive. and Samuel Vance had a lot of work to do. The flight from Indianapolis to Atlanta was the quietest flight in the history of commercial aviation. There was no clinking of glasses, no rustling of newspapers, no idle chatter about the weather or sports. The cabin of Flight 492 had become a cathedral of reflection, where every passenger in first class was silently replaying the events of the last hour, dissecting their own complicity or relief. Samuel Vance sat in seat 1A, looking out at the patchwork quilt of American farmland below. He had reopened his book of Stoic philosophy, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. He was thinking about the empty seat beside him. Seat 1B. It wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a crater where a man's career and reputation had imploded. Sarah, the flight attendant, appeared at his side. She didn't have the drink cart. She held a small plastic bottle of water and a napkin. Her hands were no longer shaking, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, placing the water on his tray table. "Is there anything else I can get you?" Samuel turned to her. He didn't look at her name tag. He looked at her face. "Please call me Sam," he said gently. "And no, I don't need anything else. But I think you do." Sarah blinked, confused. "Sir?" "Sit down, Sarah," Samuel said, gesturing to the empty seat 1B. "The jump seat is uncomfortable, and we have 40 minutes until descent. I want to talk to you." Sarah hesitated. It broke every rule in the flight attendant manual to sit with a passenger, let alone in a premium seat. She looked toward the galley, then back at Samuel. "It's okay," Samuel assured her. "The owner gives you permission." She sat down gingerly, perching on the edge of the leather seat that still held the ghost of Preston Sterling's cologne. She kept her knees together, hands folded in her lap, posture perfect. "You were terrified back there," Samuel observed. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I really need this job, Mr. Vance. Sam, my mom is sick and the health insurance. If I got fired for insubordination." "And yet you stood up," Samuel said. "When Kevin, your direct superior on the ground, told you to be quiet, you spoke. When the police arrived, you identified the real aggressor." "Why?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because it wasn't right. I've seen guys like Mr. Sterling before. They treat us like vending machines. But the way he looked at you, like you were dirt, I couldn't stomach it. I thought about my dad. He drove a bus for 30 years. If someone treated him like that." She trailed off. Samuel nodded slowly. "That is called integrity, Sarah. It's rare. Most people in corporate America like Kevin operate on a different fuel. They run on fear. Fear of losing status, fear of conflict, fear of the unknown. Kevin saw a suit and a hoodie, and his fear made the decision for him. You saw two human beings." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It wasn't the black metal security pass. It was a simple cream-colored card with a direct line. "Legacy Air is going to change, Sarah. It's going to be painful. We are going to purge the rot. I need people who can see human beings. When we land in Atlanta, I'm going to have a car waiting. Not for me. For you. Take the rest of the week off. Go see your mother." Sarah's eyes widened. "But the return flight, my schedule." "I'll handle crew scheduling," Samuel said with a small smile. "Consider this your first executive order." From across the aisle in seat 3B, Mike the tech entrepreneur watched this interaction. He hadn't uploaded the video yet. He had his finger hovering over the post button on Twitter. He had titled it, "CEO of Vance Logistics Destroys Racist Bully on Flight 492. It was guaranteed viral gold. Millions of views. But watching Samuel talk to Sarah, Mike felt a pang of guilt. He realized that posting the video might vindicate Samuel, but it would also expose Sarah and Kevin and the airline to a chaotic court of public opinion. Samuel Vance didn't look like a man who wanted a circus. He looked like a man who was surgically removing a tumor. Mike locked his iPad. He decided to wait. He would let the man work. The descent into Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was smooth. As the wheels touched down, the reality of Samuel's position began to materialize. Usually, a plane taxiing to the gate is ignored by ground crew until the engines cut. But as Flight 492 pulled into Gate B14, Samuel saw the reception committee through the window. There were 3 black SUVs parked on the tarmac. A group of men and women in dark suits stood in a rigid line near the jet bridge stairs. Among them was the chief operating officer of Legacy Air, Marcus Thorne, a man Samuel had only met once during the acquisition talks. Thorne looked pale. The plane came to a halt. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit immediately. He didn't wait for the passengers to deplane. He stood by the cockpit door facing Samuel. "Mr. Vance," Miller said, his voice projecting clearly. "It has been an honor. Thank you for handling the situation with grace." Samuel stood up, grabbing his battered carry-on. "Thank you, Captain. Keep flying the plane. Leave the politics to me." As Samuel stepped into the aisle, Mrs. Gable in seat 3A reached out and touched his arm. "Give them hell, dear," she whispered. Samuel winked at her. "That's the plan, ma'am." He walked off the plane not as a passenger but as a force of nature. The jet bridge was clear. No other passengers were allowed off yet. As Samuel emerged into the terminal gate area, the air conditioning hit him, but it was nothing compared to the chill coming from the line of executives waiting for him. Marcus Thorne stepped forward. He was a tall man with silver hair, the picture of old-school corporate aviation. He eyed Samuel's hoodie with a mixture of confusion and distaste, but he bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Chairman," Thorne said, "welcome to Atlanta. We received the report from the captain, and the call from your acquisition team about the Sterling merger." Samuel didn't stop walking. The phalanx of suits had to scramble to keep up with his long strides. "Good," Samuel said, not looking at Thorne. "Then you know we have a busy afternoon." Thorne hurried alongside him. "Sir, about the incident. We can issue a press release immediately. Apologize to Mr. Sterling for the misunderstanding. Perhaps smooth things over before the stock market reacts to the failed merger." Samuel stopped dead in the middle of the concourse. Travelers swerved around them, wondering who the guy in the hoodie was that had stopped a dozen executives in their tracks. Samuel turned to Thorne. "Apologize?" Thorne stammered. "Well, yes. It was a misunderstanding, wasn't it? Mr. Sterling is a high-value partner. If we spin it right, we can say it was a security drill." Samuel laughed. It was a dry, mirthless sound. "You want to lie, Marcus. You want to gaslight the public and my crew because you are afraid of losing a few percentage points on the ticker." Samuel leaned in close. "Mr. Sterling was arrested for assaulting a flight crew member and violating federal law. He racially profiled the owner of this airline. And you want to apologize to him?" Thorne swallowed hard. "Sir, I'm just thinking about the brand." "So am I," Marcus, Samuel said. "The brand is not the logo on the tail. The brand is the promise that when you step on our plane, you are treated with dignity. If we apologize to a bully, we tell every employee in this company that their safety is for sale." Samuel started walking again, faster this time. "Call the board. Emergency meeting. 30 minutes. But sir, the board is scattered. Some are on the golf course. Get them on Zoom. Get them in the room. I don't care. And Marcus?" "Yes, sir? Get me the file on Kevin, the station manager in Indy. And bring me the head of HR." The boardroom at Legacy Air headquarters was a cavernous space of mahogany and glass, overlooking the runways. It smelled of lemon polish and old money. 12 board members sat around the table, some in person, some on massive screens on the wall. They were mostly white, mostly male, mostly over 60. They wore ties that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. When Samuel walked in, the room went silent. He hadn't changed. He was still in his travel clothes. He threw his notebook, the one with Kevin's name in it, onto the polished wood table. It landed with a slap that sounded like a gunshot. He didn't sit. He walked to the head of the table and stood there, hands on the back of the chairman's chair. "Gentlemen and ladies," Samuel began. "We have a problem." A board member on the screen, a man named Henderson, spoke up. "Samuel, we heard about the dust-up. Unfortunate. But canceling the Sterling merger? That's a $3 billion deal. Surely we can separate the man from the money." Samuel looked at the screen. "Henderson, let me ask you a question. If a man walks into your house, insults your wife, kicks your dog, and tells you that you are unworthy of breathing the same air as him, do you do business with him because his check clears?" Henderson scoffed. "This isn't a house, Samuel. It's a corporation. We have a fiduciary duty to shareholders. My fiduciary duty, Samuel countered, his voice rising, is to ensure this company exists in 10 years. You think we are in the transportation business? We are not. We are in the service business. Samuel tapped the notebook. Today, I watched a middle management executive try to coerce a black man out of a seat he paid for, simply because that executive felt uncomfortable. I watched our own ground manager, a man named Kevin, facilitate that coercion because he was trained to fear the platinum card more than the law. Samuel paused, looking around the room. If I had been a schoolteacher or a mechanic or anyone other than Samuel Vance, I would be in a holding cell in Indianapolis right now, and Preston Sterling would be drinking scotch on his way to Atlanta. The room was uncomfortable. People shifted in their chairs. We have built a culture of cowardice, Samuel said. We have empowered the bullies because they pay full fare. We have told our staff that the customer is always right, even when the customer is a bigot. Samuel pressed a button on the remote control. The large screen behind him changed. It wasn't a PowerPoint presentation. It was a video. It was the video Mike had recorded. Samuel had asked Mike to airdrop it to him before he left the plane. The board watched in silence. They saw Preston shouting. They saw him jabbing his finger. They heard the slurs, the thug comments, the back of the bus implications. And they saw Samuel sitting still taking it. When the video ended, Samuel turned off the screen. Preston Sterling is not just a PR liability, Samuel said softly. He is a mirror. He reflects what we allow. Samuel looked at the head of HR, a woman named Linda, who was sitting near the end of the table. Linda, what is the protocol for a passenger banned for life? Linda cleared her throat. We issue a no-fly order, revoke all miles and status, and notify the FAA and partner airlines. Do it, Samuel ordered. Revoke Mr. Sterling's status. Liquidate his mileage account and donate the cash equivalent to the United Negro College Fund. And send a memo to every airline in the alliance. If he wants to fly, he can buy a private jet. He's not flying commercial. Henderson on the screen sputtered. Samuel, the lawsuit. Let him sue, Samuel said. I have an army of lawyers who are bored. I want the discovery process to be public. I want the world to see exactly who Preston Sterling is. Now about Kevin. The room tensed. They expected a firing squad. Kevin failed, Samuel said. He failed miserably. But he failed because we failed him. We gave him a manual that said de-escalate, but we didn't define the cost. We incentivized him to move planes, not to protect people. I am not firing Kevin, Samuel announced. Thorne looked up surprised. You're not? No. I'm suspending him for 6 months. During that time, he will undergo a retraining program that I am personally designing. And when he comes back, he won't be a manager. He will work the check-in counter. He will load bags. He will relearn empathy from the ground up. If he survives that, he can have his badge back. Samuel leaned forward, his hands gripping the leather of the chair. And one more thing. From today on, there is a new rule at Legacy Air. It's called the Dignity Clause. If a passenger abuses a crew member or another passenger based on race, gender, or appearance, the crew has the absolute authority to remove them. No questions asked. No management override. We back our people. Period. Samuel looked at Henderson on the screen. If that hurts the stock price, Henderson, then sell your shares. Because I'm not building a company for the next quarter. I'm building it for the next generation. He sat down. For a moment there was silence. Then slowly Linda, the head of HR, began to nod. Then Marcus Thorne. Agreed, Mr. Chairman, Thorne said quietly. Henderson Scene shift. Fulton County Jail holding area. Preston Sterling sat on a metal bench that was bolted to the floor. His tie was gone, confiscated as a suicide risk. His Italian suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. The smell of the holding cell, a mix of bleach and unwashed bodies, was a far cry from the lavender scent of the first-class cabin. He was allowed one phone call. He hadn't called his wife. He had called his boss, the CEO of Sterling Group. Jerry, you have to help me. Preston whispered into the receiver, pressing it hard against his ear to drown out the shouting of an inmate in the next cell. It was a misunderstanding. That guy. He set me up. There was a long silence on the other end. Jerry? Preston. Jerry's voice was cold. Colder than the liquid nitrogen they used to freeze assets. I just got off the phone with Vance Logistics. Jerry, listen, I can fix this. They canceled the merger, Preston. $3 billion. Gone. In a phone call that lasted 30 seconds, Preston felt his stomach drop. Jerry. And then Jerry continued, his voice devoid of any sympathy. I got an email from Legacy Air. You've been banned. For life. And they CC'd the Wall Street Journal. Preston closed his eyes. You're toxic, Preston, Jerry said. You're radioactive. Don't come to the office. Security has already cleared out your desk. Your severance is denied under the gross misconduct clause of your contract. You're done. Jerry hung up. Preston stared at the receiver. The dial tone buzzed in his ear. He slowly hung up the phone. He looked around the holding cell. There was a man sitting across from him. An older black man wearing worn-out clothes, looking tired. What you in for? The man asked. Preston looked at him. He opened his mouth to say something arrogant, something dismissive. But the words died in his throat. He looked down at his own ruined suit, his shaking hands. I made a mistake, Preston whispered. The man snorted. Yeah, we all did. Preston Sterling, the man who thought he ruled the sky, curled up on the bench and wept. Understand. Epilogue. 1 month later. O'Hare Airport was bustling. The morning rush was in full swing. At Gate B14, a new training video was playing on the monitors behind the desk. It featured Sarah, looking professional and confident, explaining the new dignity protocol to new hires. Behind the counter, a man was tagging bags. It was Kevin. He wasn't wearing a tie. He was wearing the blue vest of a ramp agent. He looked tired, humbled, but he was smiling as he helped a young mother collapse a stroller. Take your time, ma'am, Kevin said. We'll get it on board for you. Sitting in the gate area, waiting for Group 4 to be called, was Samuel Vance. He wasn't in first class today. He was flying economy. He wanted to see how the legroom was in row 32. He wanted to taste the pretzels. He was still wearing a hoodie, though this one was navy blue. He was reading his book. A young man sat down next to him. He looked at Samuel's book. Marcus Aurelius? The young man asked. Heavy reading for a flight. Samuel smiled. It keeps me grounded. The young man laughed. I'm Mike. Heading home to Atlanta. Nice to meet you, Mike. I'm Sam. The gate agent announced boarding. Group 1. First class. A man in a suit walked past them talking loudly on his phone. But as he passed the gate agent, he paused. He said thank you, and waited for the person in front of him to move. Samuel watched this small interaction. It wasn't perfect. The world hadn't changed overnight. There were still egos and there were still biases. But the air felt a little lighter. Sam, Mike said as they stood up to join the line for Group 4. You look familiar. Have we met? Samuel Vance adjusted his backpack. He looked at the plane, then back at Mike with a twinkle in his eye. I just have one of those faces, Samuel said. He walked onto the jet bridge, merging into the crowd, just another passenger on a journey. But this time the system knew he was there. And more importantly, it knew that dignity was the only currency that really mattered.